and welcome to our special Bibliotherapy Live tonight, which is all about great parties in literature. I'd love to know which are your favourite parties in literature. Do you have parties that you would love to go to in books that you've read? For instance, would you be more of a Mrs. Dalloway kind of party goer or more of a Great Gatsby? Would you be a Thomas Pynchon Gravity's Rainbow style party, or might you be more of a Bilbo Baggins 11th style party goer? Or might you actually be a Shrinking Violet type of party goer who would actually much rather stay at home and read about it in a book? I'm just giving you a little glimpse of my lovely party lights, which I'm trying to show you the fabulous atmosphere that I'm creating in my room this evening, having a virtual party with all of you lovely people. Thanks for joining me. It's great to see you. And I hope you've all got some good drinks to accompany you on this exciting journey that we're going to take through the parties of literature. There's actually so many brilliant parties that I want to go to in literature tonight. And I know there's going to be some that I'm going to miss out accidentally. So do tell me if there's any of your favourites that you want to mention, or at the end, if I haven't mentioned, tell the world, because I know there's a lot of fantastic ones out there. So I'm actually going to start with a book that I discovered while researching for this wondrous topic, which is a book I didn't know existed until I went down this excellent rabbit hole. It's called A Curious Invitation, and it's by Suzette Field, which was published in 2012. And it's a really wonderful companion to anyone who's interested in parties and literature, because it's all about all the best parties in literature, and it's telling you about them in a really friendly, great format. It's got, I think, 40 parties from the world of books, and they go from the earliest parties of Roman times with Trimalchio's dinner party, which I think was in the 1st century AD, to, well, through Gatsby, through Jane Austen, through Douglas Adams's The Flying Party, and of course the banquet in Alice in Wonderland. So in this book, she describes the parties in a really great, friendly, wonderful fashion. And I can thoroughly recommend this book for excellent reading. And I'm going to read you a little bit of this lovely book, A Curious Invitation, to give you a feeling of the way that Suzette Field tells us about parties and literature. What she does with each of the parties is she has the invitation, the guest list, the venue, the food, the dress code, the menu, the entertainment, the conversation, and the outcome. And she describes all of those with enough detail to make you feel like you could have been there. So I'm going to start by reading you a little bit about Trimalchio's dinner party, which was sometime between about AD 63 and 65. So one of the earliest literary dinner parties and the earliest of our parties that I'll be talking about tonight. Damien is here saying that I miss parties. Me too. And it takes me back to parties that we've been at together, such as the fabulous pajama parties that we had at Tilton House. Oh, those merry days. Oh, that they would come back. I'm sure we will all be at parties again soon, everyone. But meanwhile, let's enjoy parties in literature and vicariously. So let's start with a really great debauched party from the 1st century AD. The Invitation. Only a fraction of the original text of the Satyricon has come down to us today, so it's unclear who its narrator, Encolpius, and his friend Ascyltos are. Those are the narrators about the party. In fact, I'm going to miss this bit out because I know that we've got a lot to get through tonight on the fantastic parties that we're going to talk about. Moving on to the host. Bald, fat, wearing a scarlet robe and weighed down with jewellery, Trimalchio is the perfect vulgarian host. He picks his teeth with a silver quill, makes public use of a piss pot, treats his guests to a commentary on the state of his bowels, and eulogizes the medicinal benefits of farting. That's a great way to start an evening of parties, I feel. A devout voluptuary, his dissolute lifestyle is believed to be based on that of Nero, the emperor at the time. However, Trimalchio is a self-made man, a former slave who earned his millions in the shipping trade and effortlessly lives up to the stereotype of nouveau riche boorishness. He boasts about buying Sicily so that he can sail to North Africa along his own coasts. He orders that a silver dish dropped during the banquet should be swept away with the rubbish. He keeps a water clock and a liveried trumpeter in his dining room to remind him of the passing of time, which serves as a way to justify his decadent and ostentatious lifestyle. As he puts it, since we know that our death is in the offing, why don't we enjoy life? I have to agree with him there. The hostess is Trimalchio's wife, Fortunata, an ex-lap dancer with a shrewd eye for personal advancement, who now runs Trimalchio's business affairs. She refinanced his business by selling her jewellery when his first shipment of wine sank. These days, she is a respectable lady, though apparently she's lost none of her skills at performing the Kordax, a sort of Roman pole dance. The venue. Trimalchio's house shares his humble beginnings. He boasts about how, in a spate of home improvements, he transformed his former hovel into a palace with 4 dining rooms, 20 bedrooms, 2 marble colonnades, a suite of small apartments upstairs, my own bedroom, the boudoir of this viper here, his wife, and a pleasant office for his doorman. His personal touches to the decor include a wall-mounted golden casket containing the first shavings of his juvenile beard and a mural depicting the history of his rise to wealth and social standing. And who would not want a mural depicting that? Who here has a mural depicting your rise to success? I'm sure that all of you do. The entrance to the dining room, chosen for the evening's festivities, constructed from the bronze prows of a ship, overlaid with rods and axes, the insignia of a consul, to which Trimalchio has no entitlement, making it the Roman equivalent of a bogus coat of arms. I agree. Who would not want a trumpeter at your party? Well, Arctic Felix is saying that you probably wouldn't want one. I can see you might not, though at this point I would actually be thrilled to have a trumpeter coming round just for the hell of it. So the guest list here, about 16 people are invited. Most are drawn from the ranks of the local professional class, and several, like their host, are ex-slaves made good. The rhetorician Agamemnon and his pupils are in attendance. We should always have rhetoricians at our parties, I feel. Plus Philetus, a lawyer and ex-travelling salesman. I won't go through them all. The gathering also includes Hermeros, Ganymedes, Niceros, and Plocamus. Roman etiquette did not permit unaccompanied women to attend dinner parties, so the only females present are Fortunata, Telemachus's wife, and Scintilla, another wife. The superstitious Trimalchio insists that his guests enter the dining room with their right foot first to bring good luck, after which their hands are washed in snow-chilled water. That's a lovely touch, I must say. Later in wine, and their toenails trimmed by attentive Alexandrian slave boys. Come on, we all want our toenails trimmed when we go to a party. To illustrate his superior status, Trimarchio has his hands washed in perfume. The dress code. Petronius tells us a lot about what the guests said and ate, but little about what they wore. We can assume the dress code was togas, setting the precedent for a lot of modern day campus parties. Then there's the food and drink. I'll just give you a little bit of it because actually there's a huge list. The menu involves, I think, 12 courses. So I'll give you a few of them. The first course is a bronze donkey bearing a double pannier of olives flanked by a gridiron of sausages, damsons and dormice coated with poppy seeds and honey. Second course, a wooden hen sitting on a nest full of peahen's eggs, which in turn contains garden warblers cooked in spiced egg yolk. The third course is a zodiacal arrangement of hors d'oeuvre, concealing a surprise dish of winged hare, surrounded by stuffed capons and sows' bellies. It's pretty extravagant, isn't it? Then there's a whole wild boar, accompanied by pastry suckling piglets and filled with live thrushes. They do love a live bird at these Roman parties, erupting from the belly of another cooked beast. Lottie's saying that she's feeling a bit dizzy, and I know what you mean. It's quite intense, isn't it? There's also a statue of the fertility god Priapus, whose paunch holds a medley of saffron squirting cakes and fruits. This is all actually really reminding me of the Master and Margarita party, which we're coming to a bit later, where there's squirting flutes of champagne, squirting fountains of champagne. And I think the the Bulgakov novel is very much playing on this fantastic Roman banquet with similarly over the top extravagance and a lot of live animals involved. In this, there's the live ass and the live starlings. And in Bulgakov, we have a lot of live bears, monkeys, and many other creatures. It's all pretty over the top. I'll just give you the outcome of this Telemachus party. After supper, the slaves are permitted to join the diners, but this proves to be just another excuse for Telemachio to show off. He sends for his will and reads it out in its entirety, announcing the slaves' imminent freedom and graciously accepting their humble expressions of gratitude. Now thoroughly drunk, the host becomes maudlin and morbid. He issues Habinus the stonemason with instructions for designing and building his mausoleum. It's quite wrong for a man to have an elegant house in life and not to give thought to our longer place of residence. I'm sure that all of you, by the way, have thought about your own mausoleums. Lottie, you're telling me that it's the lights that are making you feel dizzy. Sorry about that. I hope that other people might be getting in the party mood with these party lights. Do let me know if you find it all a bit much. I'm just giving people a bit of a wave of those lights because I find them rather fabulous and they're definitely getting me into the literary party mode. In a final act of glorious sentimentality, which the narrator says was enough to make you spew, Trimarchio stages a dress rehearsal for his funeral, complete with musicians and weeping mourners. That's exactly the kind of thing I like to do at a party, I must say. He sends for his shroud, lies back on a mound of pillows, and instructs his trumpeters to imagine I'm dead, play something nice. Perhaps looking forward to the demise of their master more than he supposes, the slaves blare out a funeral march with such gusto that it wakens the whole neighbourhood. The city sentinels, assuming that the building is on fire, arrive and smash down the door with axes. The students grab the chance to slip gracefully away in the confusion. Then there's the legacy, which I won't read to you, but it's a rather great idea that actually there was a real man, Gaius Petronius Arbiter, who actually was inspired by Telemachus's staging of his own death at his party to create a party when he did actually die in his party, and he because he was convicted of treason, so he had to commit suicide in the way that people did in those Roman times. And so he slit his wrists and carried on partying while he died. And apparently he was having such a good party that he had to re sew up his wrists so as to carry on partying, and then allowed himself to die a bit later. He bandaged up his veins so that he could keep going. So this book is full of fabulous descriptions of parties in literature, and I feel that Suzette Field has done an excellent job of choosing brilliant parties, many of which are ones that we'll be talking about tonight, but also reducing them to the key nuggets of what makes them great literary parties. And intriguingly, I discovered from a friend on Instagram tonight that there's another previous similar book called Parties, a Literary Companion, which is by Susanna Johnston, which was written in 1994. And that I've only just discovered, so I haven't read it personally, but it looks brilliant. I think it's more of an anthology with 200 different descriptions of parties straight from literature. So I would very much recommend both of those books for getting you into the party mood and thinking about parties in literature. One of the excellent parties described in this book, The Curious Invitation, is The Great Gatsby and his fabulous parties. And we can't have an evening talking about parties in literature without visiting The Great Gatsby, which I'm always amazed at what a slim little book it is, considering what an enormous legacy it has had. And this book is one which is full of parties, but the parties in Gatsby are a combination of being wonderfully lavish and fabulous and exactly the kind of parties that you want to go to. But they also involve Jay Gatsby being on the outside of the party, and even though he is the host, and seeming to be, in a way, an observer much more than a participant. And in this book, the hero, the narrator of the book, seems to be the only person who's actually invited to the party. Everyone else seems to just turn up unexpectedly and shamelessly take advantage of Gatsby's hospitality, although that's also seemingly what he does actually want. I'm going to read you a little bit from F. Scott Fitzgerald's masterpiece to remind you of the wonderfulness of Great Gatsby. Before I do that, I'm just seeing that Damien's mentioned Dancer from the Dance with amazing Fire Island parties. So much queer joy. And I haven't actually read it, so I am definitely going to enjoy that and discover it. And also, Damien's mentioning the Beaver's Tea Party in Narnia, which actually is a really gorgeous, cozy, beautiful party too. So many different types of fantastic party. So here we have a little bit from Gatsby. The nature of Mr. Tostov's composition eluded me because just as it began, my eyes fell on Gatsby, standing alone in the marble steps and looking from one group to another with approving eyes. His tan skin was drawn attractively tight on his face, and his short hair looked as though it were trimmed every day. I could see nothing sinister about him. I wondered if the fact that he was not drinking helped to set him off from his guests, for it seemed to me that he grew more correct as the fraternal hilarity increased. When the jazz history of the world was over, girls were putting their heads on men's shoulders in a puppyish, convivial sort of way. Girls were swooning backward playfully into men's arms, even into groups, knowing that someone would arrest their falls, But no one swooned backwards on Gatsby, and no French bob touched Gatsby's shoulder, and no singing quartets were formed with Gatsby's head for one link. So Gatsby is sadly, though the centre of things, he's also, in a way, forgotten or ignored. And then there's just one other little bit that I wanted to read to you from the end of that scene, which is one of the first parties that's described in the book. The caterwauling horns had reached a crescendo, and I turned away and cut across the lawn towards home. I glanced back once. A wafer of moon was shining over Gatsby's house, making the night fine as before, and surviving the laughter and the sound of his still, glowing garden. A sudden emptiness seemed to flow now from the windows and the great doors, endowing with complete isolation the figure of the host, who stood on the porch, his hand up in a formal gesture of farewell. I love that image of Gatsby's complete isolation as he lingers on his porch saying farewell to his final guests, but he's left lonely and in solitude at the end of the night. Gatsby, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, was to some extent inspired by another amazing party in literature, which was Le Grand Meulne by Alain Fournier, which was an amazing and very memorable book all about nostalgia for youth. It's a coming of age book, and The Great Gatsby was actually named after that book, Le Grand Meulne, because that means the Great Meulne. And the title Le Grand Meulne is referring to this boy who everyone called Le Grand Meulne because he was very tall and amazing and much loved by boys and girls. And Meulne stumbles across this kind of enchanted party which is taking place in the middle of the countryside in a bucolic and beautiful spot. And he ends up having a 3-day party where he falls in love. And it's a very life-changing moment for him because he falls in love with this girl and then staggers off into the unknown and can't find her again for years later, and then his life completely changes. And it's not surprising, I feel, that F. Scott Fitzgerald was so deeply affected by that book, because it's such a book of longing, it's such a book of nostalgia, and also it does have this absolutely wonderful central story where there's an amazing, beautiful outdoor 3-day party, which is one of the types of party that I must say I most love. Those outdoor parties, which are rather like maybe some of the closest that we can get to that now is by going to a festival for many days on end. I mean, not right now, but back in non-COVID times. And the Alain Fournier kind of party would have been rather like a modern day festival, in that there would have been constant music, constant food and drink, and constant socialization. So Gatsby and Grand Meulne are strangely closely linked, and they also, I feel, very much connect with another of my favourite books, which has many fabulous parties in it, which is the children's book by A.S. Byatt, a beautiful book, quite a big fat tome, which is a really fascinating and pretty epic novel written in 2009, which follows the adventures of several interrelated families and their children from 1855 and through World War One. It's loosely based on the life of the children's writer E. Nesbit, who I think, genuinely had a fairly complex love life and life of writing. And A.S. Byatt said in a Guardian interview that this book started with the idea that writing children's books isn't good for the writer's own children. She said, there are some dreadful stories. Christopher Robin at least lived. Kenneth Graham's son put himself across a railway line and waited for the train. Then there's J.M. Barrie. One of the boys that Barrie adopted almost certainly drowned himself. This struck me, says A.S. Byatt, as something that needed investigating. And the second thing was, I was interested in the structure of E. Nesbit's family, how they all seem to be Fabians and fairy story writers. So it's a book with quite a lot of deep and painful themes. It's about the Wellwood family, who comprise of Olive, who's the main character, really, the matriarch, who is the children's writer, her husband and children. And they are Fabians living in a world of artists, writers, and craftsmen, all moving into new ways to express art, living an artful life before the horrors and loss of the Great War. While the central character Olive is a writer of children's literature, supporting her family with her writing, the title of the book refers to the children in the book. And one of the great things about the book is that it's full of stories that Olive writes for her children. So it's dotted with these quite long stories, which are often fantastical. But also, that's a digression, the parties in the book are really fantastic. Many times they're outdoors. They quite often involve wonderful puppet shows, plays, children getting involved in writing plays and being in the plays. And they often take place in wonderful locations, such as the beautiful Sussex countryside, and also in what's now the Natural History Museum, which at that point, one of the characters was actually living in secretly before he becomes a famous potter. So it's full of wonderful, quite anarchic parties. And there's also quite a few references to real people such as J.M. Barrie, Oscar Wilde, Emmeline Pankhurst, and many more real people who were around on the art scene at the time. So the children's book is a really lovely book to disappear into if you feel like going into a world of parties from pre-war times. Now I want to talk to you about The Snowball by Bridget Brophy, which is a masked ball. So I'm going to put on my mask for this section. The Snowball is a really gorgeous book, as you can see, a beautiful book, written in 1965, which is all about New Year's Eve. It was written in 1964, and it's a masked ball on New Year's Eve, which has three women in its centre. There's the ball's hostess, who's a 50-something woman called Anne, who slides through the throng clad in a golden syrup of lame. I love that image. She's like golden syrup slipping through the party. She's in a grand house in London. I think it takes place in Chelsea. It's not ever made absolutely clear. And the house forms the setting for the ball. It's full of ugly statues, grand staircases, voluptuously white bedrooms, and secretly stashed handfuls of expensive peppermint creams that Anne occasionally steals off to eat. By the way, I stole this mask from my daughter, and I've been waiting for an excuse to wear it, so I'm very glad to be talking to you about a masked ball tonight. Let's have a masked ball. Wouldn't that be fun? Come on, let's do it after when lockdown ends. She's not the only one sneaking around this house. 18-year-old Ruth, awkwardly costumed as Cherubino from Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, arrives with her parents and proceeds to do the most teenage thing imaginable at the time, pre-phones, of course, interspersing her dances with brief retreats to the cloakroom to write in her diary. Isn't that a fantastic thing that we should encourage people to do once more? Write in your diary if you're having a difficult time at a party. Leave your phone behind. Take a diary instead and try, like 18-year-old Ruth in this book, to capture what's happening at the party in real time. Her entries are frantic and earnest, an effort to have an exact record of how she felt at the time. Because, she says, I'm sure people falsify when they remember such things afterwards. Throughout the night, she frets about boys, intimacy, and the heroine of the book, Anna Kay. And she says, Anna Kay is the most attractive woman I've ever seen. I detest her. Brophy creates a world of distorted surfaces. The prose is packed with chandeliers, mirrors, thick carpets, Siamese cats, grotesquely painted cupids, crooked wigs, and men who resemble boiled eggs. Characters dip in and out of view. As the hours tick by, friends are rendered strangers. Have you noticed what a metaphysical ball this is? Asks a masked man to their heroine, Anna. All these people bumping into each other and asking, who are you? Even when they've known each other for years. Costume balls have always been rich ground for novelists and playwrights. What better, after all, than an arena in which identity is malleable and no one is quite who they claim to be? This novel, The Snowball, has many rich layers to it, and one of the main characters doesn't unmask himself until the very end of the book, and that's one of the great revelations of the novel. Anna Kay, the heroine, at one stage of the novel interprets the silken waves of costumes as ocean waves which crashed against the staircase, casting up a sprinkling of foam and laughter. Although there is an obvious point about motion, the comings and goings of a party are often tidal in nature. Remember parties full of people which seem a bit like waves coming in and out? There's something powerful too in this acknowledgement of a party as a place of collective immersion. I love that idea that a party is a bit like diving into the sea, where you have to give yourself up to the currents and to the pull and the push of the different people at the party, to the inexorable people who are pushing by with drinks and trying to lure you to the drinks table. The book's gaudy setting is defined by the close rolling press of other people's bodies. Remember that, everyone, when you're at a party and you just can't get away from everyone else? Wouldn't it be great to be at a party like that now, squashed on the staircase? The book's idea of descending into the ocean is an experience textured with sweat, heat, noise, errant limbs, and the brush of nearby garments. It's all pretty fabulous. And this does link up also to The Master and Margarita, which I mentioned earlier, by Bulgakov. I've got a selection of appropriate headgear with me for this evening, and I think I'm now going to put on a slightly devilish hat so as to enter Moscow for the next few minutes. So the ball in Bulgakov's Master and Margarita is an iconic party which comes up on many people's favourites when they talk about parties in literature. It's a completely surreal and rather crazy party, which is based on real events in Moscow. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about some of those real parties that were taking place in Moscow at the time, because Bulgakov was not completely making it up as a demonic interlude. Many of the scenes that he mentioned were based to some degree on truth. So in 1934, one of the most notorious parties was organised by William Bullitt in the Spaso House, which was a Christmas reception. One of the embassy employees, Charles Wheeler Thayer, colourfully described it in his book, Bears in the Caviar, 1951. Ambassador Bullitt, who was not really impressed by the party circuit in Stalin's Moscow, had ordered his staff to organise a unique reception for the American colony in Moscow and make it good, he insisted. They've been long enough without a real shindig. During the party, the upper lights all of a sudden went out, and the attendees saw 3 big black sea lions crawl from the bathroom into the reception hall. Misha, Shura, and Liuba. One of them was holding on its nose a little Christmas tree. While skillfully balancing this, the other held a tray with glasses and the third a bottle of champagne. They even played the Internationale on accordions. Suddenly, the animal trainer from the Moscow circus, who had had one too many, suddenly knocked off his feet. The artist felt right away that they were at large now, and they kicked up a real brawl. It took quite a lot of trouble to catch the animals and bring them back to the truck, to get them back to the circus where they came from. And even in the way back, the animals continued to provide entertainment. Halfway home, Lyuba managed to jump off the truck. In winter, in the streets of Moscow, there's usually an icy composition of hard-packed snow, so Lyuba was in her element when she frolicked along the boulevard. Half of the police of the Arbat district were deployed to chase her down to the banks of the Moscow River before they surrounded her. In her diary, Elena Sergeevna, who was the wife of Bulgakov, wrote about the 1935 Spring Festival as follows. I've never seen such a ball in my life. They were all carrying tailcoats. There were only a few jackets and smokings. They danced in a room with columns lit by streams of light coming from a gallery. Behind a gate which separated them from the orchestra, there were living pheasants and other birds. We had dinner at small tables in a huge dining room with, in a corner, living baby bears, goats, and roosters in cages. During dinner, musicians played the accordion. We wanted to leave the place at 3:30, but they didn't allow us to leave. We left at 5:30 in one of the embassy cars. It was already daylight when we arrived home. So that's Bulgakov's wife talking about a real party that they attended. And so when it comes to the ball in The Master and Margarita, many of the scenes that happened with real live monkeys, bears, and pigeons were based on that extremely extravagant party. But Bulgakov does take it to the next level by bathing Margarita in blood in order to get her ready for her guests. And also she eventually flies, and many, if not most, of the guests at the party are actually dead. And at one point they slough off their skin and their mortal remains. So it's going to a bit of a different extreme, but clearly Bulgakov was basing it to a large degree on things that they had actually witnessed. And Bulgakov did mention many real people who were already dead, who were supposedly attending that ball, but he obviously couldn't mention Stalin himself, much of which the book is a satire about, because Stalin was still alive. So also in Bulgakov's Master and Margarita, many of the guests are naked, which wouldn't have happened in real life, but it's an absolutely extreme bacchanal, which many future novelists have based their more crazy parties on. So, for instance, Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan, 2013, isn't quite going to the extremes and lengths that The Master and Margarita went to, but there's definitely the odd nod to some of the madness and extravagance of the Master and Margarita party in his highly satirical and very funny novel, which has a really ridiculously lavish wedding. uh, Singaporean super heir Nick brings his naive American born Chinese girlfriend Rachel home to the wedding of his billionaire best friend, Colin Koo. And Rachel is thrown into a world of private islands, palaces, and jets. She learns the hard way about the mad lifestyle of her eligible boyfriend. And eventually, when she goes to this extremely high society wedding of Singapore, there are no flowers inside the church because there was no need. Suspended from the ceiling were thousands of young aspen trees, meticulously arranged to create a vaulted forest floating just above everyone's heads. Then the lights dim and the bride materializes. I think she actually comes flanked by bridesmaids carrying cherry blossom branches like a pre Raphaelite maiden floating through the air through a sun dappled forest. So it's not quite Master and Margarita, but it's pretty crazy and extreme. Moving on from there, knowing that time will run out with all these fantastic parties that we want to sail through tonight, I would like to mention Mrs. Dalloway's fabulous party in her book, in Virginia Woolf's book of the same name, written in 1925, which, if people haven't read, is a really uplifting description of somebody preparing for a party all day, and then you do have the party that night too. And I was talking to people earlier today about how I do still feel that the anticipation of the party can be the most fun bit of the party, though I love the aftermath as well, possibly both of which I love more than the actual party, though I do love a great party. And there aren't actually that many after parties described in literature. I'd love to know if you have any that you can tell me about. I know of one, which we'll come to in a bit. So, Mrs. Dalloway, I'm going to read you a little bit from the novel because I think Virginia Woolf best speaks for herself. But I do love the breathlessness of the writing. The way it's all written in these lovely long sentences makes you feel very much as if you are still living on that day with Mrs. Dalloway. Cheers for people that are joining now. We're just visiting Mrs. Dalloway's party. And now Clarissa escorted her Prime Minister down the room, prancing, sparkling with the stateliness of her grey hair. We should all have a party with a Prime Minister, or maybe not this Prime Minister, in our house. She wore earrings and a silver green mermaid's dress. Lolloping on the waves and braiding her tresses, she seemed, having that gift still, to be, to exist, to sum it all up. In the moment as she passed, turned, caught her scarf in some other woman's dress, unhitched it, laughed, all with the most perfect ease and air of a creature floating in its element. But age had brushed her, even as a mermaid might behold in her glass the setting sun on some very clear evening over the waves. There was a breath of tenderness. Her severity, her prudery, her woodenness were all warmed through now, and she had about her, as she said goodbye to the thick, gold-laced man who was doing his best. And good luck to him to look important, an inexpressible dignity, an exquisite cordiality, as if she wished the whole world well, and must now, being on the very verge and rim of things, take her leave. So she made him think, but he was not in love. Indeed, Clarissa felt the Prime Minister had been good to come, and walking down the room with him with Sally there and Peter there, and Richard very pleased, with all those people rather inclined, perhaps, to envy. She had felt that intoxication of the moment, that dilatation of the nerves, of the heart itself, till it seemed to quiver, steeped, upright. Yes, but after all, it was what other people felt. That, for though she loved it and felt it tingle and sting, all those semblances, these triumphs, dear old Peter, for example, thinking her so brilliant, had a hollowness. At arm's length they were, not in the heart, and it might be that she was growing old, but they satisfied her no longer as they used. And suddenly, as she saw the Prime Minister go down the stairs, the gilt rim of the Sir Joshua picture of the little girl with a snuff brought back Kilman with a rush. Kilman, her enemy. That was satisfying. That was real. Ah, how she hated her. Hot, hypocritical, corrupt, with all that power. Elizabeth, seducer, the woman who'd crept in to steal and defile. Richard would say, what nonsense. She hated her. She loved her. It was enemies one wanted, not friends. Do we invite enemies to our parties? Not Mrs. Durrant and Clara, Sir William and Lady Bradshaw, Miss Trulock and Eleanor Gibson, whom she saw coming upstairs. They must find her if they wanted her. She was for the party. So I love that. She goes from joy, ecstasy, and contentment with everything that she's done so far to hatred, and then back to being for the party. We're all for the party. So Mrs. Dalloway, one of my favourite parties in literature. Another one that I really love because it's all about the anticipation of the party is Christine Dwyer Hickey's lovely book, which I'm just looking to show you and I can't find it, which is called The Narrow Land, which is all about the anticipation of a party, which then actually goes on for 100 pages. And it is a really fantastic novel. It's all about Edward Hopper, the painter, and it's fictionalized, but very much based on real life because it describes his paintings in great detail. So that's also why I love it. But it's a huge section of it is all about building up to this yearly party that two of the main characters have. And there's the huge build up to the party, which is all on Long Island on a beautiful beach residence. And it's about the two boys who are about 11 who are trying to help out at the party. And they spend some time hiding under tables, hiding under chairs, fighting each other, having quite major crises, going and hiding on the beach, discovering terrible things about each other, and then eventually the party itself happens. So the whole party in that book, The Narrow Land, takes place over 100 pages, which is pretty epic in terms of literary parties. I don't know that many books where so much page space is devoted to one party, but it's an absolute joy because it's so complex with all the different emotions running high through its pages, and also the way that the author describes the light, the sunsets, the sea, the artists, the sense of confusion and complexities between the relationships with the different people is utterly compelling. The Fellowship of the Ring is another book which is pretty important in terms of parties as they go. Bilbo Baggins's 11th party is the very beginning scene of the book, The Fellowship of the Rings. And it is a brilliant scene, which I'd hugely recommend rereading if you read it in your distant youth, or reading for the first time if you've never read it, because it's a kind of party of all parties. It's got absolutely everything that you'd want in a party. Amazing food, dancing, music. It goes on for at least a day. Everyone gives each other presents, so literally everyone gets presents from each other, And Tolkien describes how hobbits always give each other presents when it's their own birthday, which is a rather lovely idea. And then it has an utterly dramatic ending, which people who know the books will remember. I'll just read you a little bit of it because I know that time is running out. But I do think going back to it, it's surprisingly great. Even if you're not a Tolkien geek, I do think you would really love it for its sheer party brilliance. So here we go. The next day, more carts rolled up the hill. This is the pre-party scene, and still more carts. There might have been some grumbling about dealing locally, but that very week, orders began to pour out of Bag End for every kind of provision, commodity or luxury that could be obtained in Hobbiton or Bywater or anywhere in the neighbourhood. People became enthusiastic, and they began to tick off the days on the calendar, and they watched eagerly for the postman, hoping for invitations. Before long, the invitations began pouring out, and the Hobbiton post office was blocked, and the Bywater post office was snowed under, and voluntary assistant postmen were called for. There was a constant stream of them going up the hill, carrying hundreds of polite variations of, "Thank you, I will certainly come." A notice appeared on the gate at Bag End. "No admittance except on party business." Even those who had or pretended to have party business were seldom allowed inside. I'm just going to skip a bit and read you a little bit more about the actual party. Hold your horses. Here we go. This is where Bilbo is giving his speech and things are about to get dramatic. "I hope you're all enjoying yourselves as much as I am." Deafening cheers, cries of yes and no, noises of trumpets. Trumpets again. Let's have trumpets at our parties. And horns, pipes and flutes and other musical instruments. There were, as has been said, many young hobbits present. Hundreds of musical crackers had been pulled, most of them more the mark Dale on them, which did not convey much to most of the hobbits, but they all agreed they were marvellous crackers. They contained instruments, small but of perfect make and enchanting tones. Indeed, in one corner, some of the young tooks and brandy-bucks, supposing Uncle Bilbo to have finished, since he'd plainly said all that was necessary, now got up an impromptu orchestra and began a merry dance tune. Master Edward Everard Took and Miss Melilot Brandybuck got on a table and with bells in their hands began to dance the Springle Ring. A pretty dance, but rather vigorous. But Bilbo had not finished. Seizing a horn, we should all have a horn to appeal to people at parties, from a youngster nearby, he blew 3 loud hoots. The noise subsided. "I shall not keep you for long. I've called you all together for a purpose. Indeed, for 3 purposes. First of all, to tell you that I am immensely fond of you all, and that 71 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable hobbits. I didn't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you as well as you deserve." This was unexpected and rather difficult. There were some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work out and see if it came to a compliment. Secondly, to celebrate my birthday. I'm not going to read all of it because it's just too long and I know we're going to run out of time, but it does end well, and I'm just going to give you this last little bit. Thirdly and finally, I wish to make an announcement. He spoke this last word so loudly and suddenly that everyone sat up who still could. I regret to announce that, though, as I said, 71 years is far too short a time to spend among you, this is the end. I am leaving now. Goodbye. He stepped down and vanished. Now that's a great way to end a party, isn't it? So I did say that I was going to mention the aftermath of a party, and the best party aftermath that I could find, apart from Melvin Burgess's Doing It, which is a young adult book, which is excellent, and I will talk about in another session when we do our young adult session soon. Then there's Cannery Row by John Steinbeck, which at the very end of the book has a party and a really lovely aftermath in which Doc, one of the heroes of the novel, is sitting in his house, waking up, in fact, in the aftermath of a party. And it's a really lovely description of him picking up all the glasses, washing them up in the sink, pondering over the music that was played last night, and having really lovely, blurry after party thoughts with music that he puts on and listens to, with beautiful, pure, sweet voices, which he listens to very carefully while he washes up his glasses and makes very sure not to interrupt his washing up with too loud a clattering. And I think that's a really lovely scene. And for me, it is one of the most gorgeous moments of a party, is actually when it comes to an end. Everyone's left and you've just got your lovely memories of the party. And actually, the washing up is a rather beautiful experience because you've got all those memories from your gorgeous evening. There have been other books which I intended to mention and haven't sadly had time to do. But if you go to the bookshop link, bookshop.org, which is on the Damien Barr Literary Salon Facebook page, you can find the list of all the books that I've been talking about this evening, and also other ones which I haven't had time to mention yet. But I hope that this session has given you some ideas for great parties that you might want to create yourself. You could do parties in the style of Mrs. Dalloway, or Great Gatsby, or Bilbo Baggins, or even the Beaver's Tea Party from Narnia. And also, if you're someone that doesn't actually want to go to a party or throw one yourself, then you've got some brilliant books to read about parties in. And also, let's face it, we're probably not going to be going to indoor parties for quite a long time. So all the more reason to read about them instead. So in May, on my session here, I'm going to be talking about young adult and young adult crossover literature. So that's books that are branded as young adult, but which adults also love to read. So I'm really looking forward to that session. In June, I'm going to be talking about short stories. And then in July, I'm going to be talking about happiness in literature, which is going to be a really interesting session. On the 22nd of this month, April, we have a special salon with David Rockwell, which is free. And you should definitely come to that. It's going to be a great session, live streamed on our YouTube channel. And you can get information and tickets on the Literary Salon Facebook page, and also on the Literary Salon website itself, which is www.theliterarysalon.co.uk. And also, there is our salon 1 month today with Paris Lees as the guest. She's going to be interviewed by Alexandra Hemmensley, and this is the first of our new strand of salons hosted by guest hosts. So that's going to be really exciting. Damien will still be in the events chat room and happy to talk to any salonistas. So again, find those tickets, or find the information for that on the Literary Salon website. So thanks so much for joining me tonight. It's been really great to party with you. And on that note, I think my coach awaits. So I'm just going to put on my cloak and shimmy off into the night. I think I might have to take off my hat to put this cloak on. It's been great to see you. and I will see you all very soon. Good night.